Hello and welcome back to Psychology 303, the analysis of everyday behavior. I'm Dr. Wendy Williams, and today we're going to be talking about Chapter 4, and I want to start by talking about positive reinforcement, which we've talked a little bit about in class, and now I want to do it more formally. So what exactly is a reinforcer? Well, a reinforcer is a consequence that serves to strengthen behavior. First of all, reinforcers always come after the target behavior. In fact, it's produced by the target behavior. In other words, it's contingent on the target behavior. In other words, the target behavior must occur before the reinforcer is delivered, and ideally, the behavior itself will produce the reinforcer. It makes the target behavior stronger and more likely and more probable. In other words, a reinforcer that is a consequence for a behavior that's desired and positive, when the target behavior produces that reinforcer, that target behavior becomes stronger and more likely to occur. It can be used to establish new behaviors. It can maintain or strengthen existing behaviors. So reinforcers have a lot of potential power. Now, there are two basic kinds of reinforcers. There are positive reinforcers and negative reinforcement, or two processes, which we call positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement involves a particular type of stimulus. It usually involves something that we call an appetitive stimulus, which is something that you desire or something that you would work to earn, something that you like. And typically, we use that positive reinforcer following a target behavior in order to strengthen that behavior. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, there are two types. There's escape and avoidance. And in both cases, there is not a positive or appetitive stimulus that the individual is working to earn. Instead, there is an aversive stimulus, something that the individual does not like, and something that they would work to get away from. With escape, the aversive stimulus is present. It's already occurring. It's something that they would like to get away from. And the target behavior will remove them from, or remove the stimulus, or remove the individual from that stimulus. And following the effective removal of the stimulus, you increase the likelihood of using that behavior again the next time you're in the presence of that stimulus you don't like. So the stimulus is removed after the target behavior occurs, and in that way, it strengthens that behavior. Avoidance, on the other hand, the aversive stimulus is not actually present, but you would like to avoid it. You know it's out there, you don't like it, so you engage in behaviors that effectively prevent it from ever being presented. So the aversive stimulus is prevented by the target behavior. As long as you're engaging in the target behavior, the aversive stimulus is not presented. Therefore, the target behavior becomes strengthened. When we talk about positive reinforcers, we usually talk about something called an appetitive stimulus. And I like the word appetitive. If you look, here I'm going to use my cursor. If you look at the word appetitive, it looks like appetite, which is supposed to be a good thing. In other words, an appetitive stimulus is something that you would like to earn, something that you would like to have, something that you desire. And when it's presented following a behavior, it can increase the frequency of that behavior. The behavior that produces it can actually get stronger in terms of frequency or magnitude, strength or probability, or likelihood. Positive reinforcers are stimuli that you would work to earn. So what are some positive reinforcers for you? Do you like chocolate chip cookies? Do you like candy? Do you like quiet music? There are lots of things. We've been talking about positive reinforcers. And so in that reinforcement bag, you should have items that you would like to have, or activities you would like to engage in that are fun, pleasing, pleasant, enjoyable, things that you like. So here are some of my positive reinforcers. These are a few of my favorite things. I love chocolate chip cookies, although I'm not supposed to eat them. I love chocolate. I'm not supposed to eat that either. I like everything associated with New Zealand because I did my postdoc there. I got to live in New Zealand for 6 months, way down at the very bottom of the South Island, right here in this little town called Dunedin, which has the university, one of the universities that are the closest to Antarctica in the world. I also love all things Celtic, and of course, I love Lord of the Rings, primarily because of Aragorn, who I have a crush on. Okay, so all reinforcers, and punishers for that matter, but we're talking about reinforcers. All reinforcers have to be defined by the individual receiving them, not by the giver. We've talked about this in class. Not everybody responds to the same stimuli in the same way. We all have our preferences and things that we don't like. When we're attempting to modify someone's behavior, we really need to check to see if you have appropriate reinforcers. My dog Dixie, she loves hot dogs. My husband can't stand them. He prefers oranges. I have to be careful not to give the oranges to the dog who gets sick, or the hot dogs to my husband who doesn't like them. So I have to be careful who gets what reinforcer. And that's true for not just dogs versus people, but for people versus people. Another important thing to know about reinforcers is to not be late. Delaying a reinforcer can actually reduce its value. Depending on the client or the individual that you're working with, a long enough delay could even wipe out the entire value of a reinforcer completely, because there might be other reinforcers available for other kinds of behavior. So if I'm promised a fancy dinner, but it doesn't happen tonight, then it doesn't happen again, and it doesn't happen again, after a while, I'm not even going to want to go or lose interest. So you don't want to delay. And if you have to wait, at least for a little while, you can give a clue that a reinforcer has been earned. This is called a conditioned reinforcer. It usually has no value by itself, but when it's paired with reliable reinforcement, they can become powerful as well. So if you ever have a dog and you've used a clicker and paired it with food, you can use that clicker to signal to the dog what they just did was correct and that they've earned a reinforcer. Dolphins, they often will use a whistle to let them know that they've done a correct behavior and can come back and get a fish. For us, for humans, we rely on things like stamping in our timesheets or getting good grades on a single test as a cue that we're doing well in the class. Giving yourself a sticker is a way to remind yourself that you're going to get a reinforcer later and that you're doing well in your behavior modification project. So there are a lot of ways. In and of themselves, they aren't necessarily very reinforcing, but it's because they're paired with what we call primary reinforcers or real reinforcers that they gain their value. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about learned and unlearned reinforcers briefly. So let's take a peek ahead. We'll talk about conditioned reinforcement a little bit later, but I do want to talk about these two different types of reinforcers. Learned versus unlearned reinforcers. Unlearned or primary naturalistic types of reinforcement are things that we like without ever having to learn about them, without having training. It can be a stimulus. It can be something we can see or hear. It could be something that we taste, something that we do, but it's pleasurable in and of itself, and we never really have to learn that it's a good thing. So, for example, babies show a distinct preference. Pardon me for my wiggling my cursor around there. Babies show a distinct preference for sweet versus salty from the time they're born. So sweet things tend to be primary reinforcers for most humans. Engaging in certain kinds of activities, affection, attention. We're social animals, and so we respond to social interaction very spontaneously and very naturally. Learned reinforcers, on the other hand, are things that don't have much reinforcing value whatsoever by themselves, but they become reinforcing because they're associated with these primary reinforcers. Conditioned reinforcers are stimuli that are not reinforcing on their own, but when you pair them reliably with a naturalistic reinforcer like food or affection, they acquire reinforcing qualities. So, we talked about this a minute ago, so using a whistle with a dolphin, when that whistle is paired reliably with fish, that whistle becomes powerful enough to strengthen behavior by itself, as long as it continues to be paired with fish. Do a little test. If you have a dog, go shake your dog food box or your dog biscuit box and see if they come running. They've learned to associate the sound of that box with getting a biscuit. So the sound is a conditioned reinforcer. Why? Because it's been paired with the primary reinforcer of the food or the biscuit. Unlearned reinforcers are naturally appetitive stimuli. They're things that we naturally respond to. Any stimulus that can be used as a reinforcer without any previous learning would be an unlearned reinforcer. And the appetitive strength that does not develop as a result of an association with another stimulus, like food and water and affection or a range of comfortable temperatures, are all things that most mammals respond to pretty naturally without any training. So here are some examples of the difference between learned and unlearned reinforcers. In the unlearned column, we would put foods that we enjoy, foods that we like, things that are yummy. Having air. If you're in a situation where your air has been taken away, then you would work pretty hard to get that oxygen back. Sex is a very powerful primary reinforcer. Affection is a very powerful reinforcer. Attention can be a very powerful unlearned reinforcer or primary reinforcer. Learned reinforcers, on the other hand, are things that you have to have experience with before they become meaningful, before they become strong enough to strengthen behavior. So, for example, certain ringtones. Now, it used to be when you had a certain ringtone for your phone and it would ring, it would mean there's someone on the other end. Nowadays, we actually can assign ringtones to certain people. And when we are in a relationship with someone, that person's ringtone on our phone can be very powerful as a reinforcer. Getting a grade on a test, getting an A or an A+ on a test can be very reinforcing. Like I said previously, it's really just pencil scratches on a piece of paper, but it is associated with other kinds of activities that become available to us. So getting to be on a research team or getting to be a TA for a teacher. The smell of good food. Interestingly, while smell is very powerful, the smell of particular foods has to be learned. And so when you go home for Thanksgiving and you can smell all of those good things, that walking in the door will reinforce your drive home. And yet you're not actually eating the food. It isn't until you sit down to really enjoy that Thanksgiving dinner that you'll get your reinforcer. But the immediate thing that happens when you walk through the door is how good the house smells. Money. Money is a great example of a learned reinforcer, a conditioned reinforcer. Money itself is nothing more than ink printed on paper. And in fact, money isn't reinforcing if it's not from a country that you recognize. So I could give you pesos and they wouldn't mean very much to you because we don't use pesos here. So money, we have to learn about money associated with things like being able to pay our rent and put gas in our car and buy food, and before money actually becomes meaningful. All right. Let me move on here. Natural consequences. So this is just a little slide that kind of shows the difference between natural or primary consequences that are appetitive or aversive. Things that we naturally find pleasing or displeasing. Sweet versus other flavors. We have to learn to like those other flavors as we get older, but as children, sweet is a very powerful reinforcer. Air, sex, affection, very appetitive stimuli that we enjoy. Aversives, on the other hand, are things like loud noises or things that are painful or uncomfortable. Bad smells, foods that taste bad. Those are aversive stimuli. So you need to kind of be able to tell the difference between, these are like on the left we have the good things and on the right we have the bad things. And I can use both columns for reinforcement. I can reinforce your behavior with sugar or access to oxygen or being presented with an attractive person or being affectionate or showing attention to you. And I can also strengthen certain behaviors if those behaviors eliminate a loud noise or eliminate pain or discomfort, that take away bad smells or prevent yucky flavors from being presented. The behaviors that keep the aversives away will also get stronger through what we call negative reinforcement, which I'll come back to a little bit later. Now, there is a special case of naturalistic reinforcers, which are called activity reinforcers. And these are things that we enjoy doing. It's not stuff, it's just things we enjoy doing. And some activities are intrinsically reinforcing, like exercise and play and sleep and sexual activity. And if you deprive people of them, they will actually work to gain access to these activities. People will actually work. If you make them sleep deprived, they'll work to have time to sleep. And so they're very special because they're not just reinforcers. We call them activity reinforcers because it's actually the activity itself that seems to be naturalistically pleasing. So ultimately, activity reinforcers need to be tailor-made to the individual as well. And we can use them to strengthen behavior by placing contingencies on them. And some of these might make sense to you depending on what your life has been like. So for example, if you've ever been on a sports team, if you want to play in the game on Friday, you have to have a 3.0 GPA in your classes that week. And so often coaches will use this contingency, sort of an if-then contingency. If you want to play on the game, then you have to have a 3.0 GPA. Your parents, when you lived at home, if you want to go to the movies with your friends on Saturday night, your room has to be clean. So there's a contingency between your behavior and being able to go to the movies. And so we strengthen the behavior of keeping your room clean so you can go out on Saturday night with your friends. Sleeping in late on Sunday. I'm battling this one with my son. I want him to finish his homework, and if he wants to sleep in on Sunday, he needs to finish his homework before Sunday night. Before Saturday night, so that he can sleep in on Sunday. If you want to go bike riding with your boyfriend, he might say that you need to help him change the oil in his car before he can go. And so by helping him get his car oil changed, there's time left in the day and you can go ride your bike. So there are a lot of, these are called contingent relationships, where we make one activity contingent on one that maybe you wouldn't be so excited about doing, but because your activity reinforcer depends on that less than enjoyable activity, you're more likely to do it. So these reinforcers are not naturally, learned reinforcers are not naturally reinforcing. They acquire their reinforcing properties by being paired with another reinforcer. So it really is, if you go back to your Psych 101 class, it really is Pavlovian or classical conditioning, where there's an association between these learned, relatively neutral stimuli and primary reinforcers that give the neutral stimuli their power. Often they're cues that tell us that a reinforcer is coming or that's been earned. Conditioned reinforcers are cues that are paired with unlearned reinforcers, so they're things like kind words and grades and clickers or a whistle, applause or tokens that you might earn. Each one is paired with some more natural reinforcer like food or affection or warmth. And so they become a very useful tool for behavior modification because these conditioned reinforcers can bridge the delay between a behavior and the primary unlearned reinforcer. So if you think for a minute about an example might be, actually there was a professor in the 1970s named Homme who did a project with a kindergarten class. And he wanted the children to, they were having trouble getting the children to sit still to receive instructions for the morning. Because they would get up and they would run around the room and they would push their chairs around and they were very disruptive. And so Homme came in, Dr. Homme came in, and he set a new set of rules. He said, I can tell that you like to run around and scream and push chairs around. And I want to give you time to do that. So here's what the new rules are going to be. The new rules are you need to sit quietly. When you come in, you're going to put your coat and your lunchbox in your cubby, and then you're going to come and sit down on the rug in front of the teacher, and you're going to wait for instructions. And when she gives you the instructions and everyone is free to go to their workstation, you're going to earn 30 seconds where you can run and scream. And he asked the children, he went over it several times, and then he said, let's practice. And so he would have the kids go over and pretend to put their coat in their lunchbox, and then they would come rushing over and they would sit quietly, crisscross applesauce, put your hands in your lap and sit quietly and wait for the teacher. And then the teacher would say, today we're going to color, you're going to go and cut out leaves, and you're going to color your leaves, and we're going to paste them to the windows. And so does everyone understand? Repeat it back to me. And when she was done, she said, okay, I think we're ready. Then Dr. Hummy would say, okay, run and scream. And the little kids would run around and they would scream for 30 seconds until the teacher blew a whistle, and then they would go to their activity. And so he was able to use this naturalistic behavior use this naturalistic reinforcer to get the kids to behave in a certain way. And for him, the condition reinforcer was his instruction that they could run and scream, and then they would run and scream. Another example is the idea that children behave well in class, but the reinforcers don't happen until after school or maybe at recess. And so you might give them tokens, and then they can use those tokens, which don't count for anything really, until they cash them in for prizes in the middle of the day or at the end of the day. So that's kind of my first talk on positive reinforcement, and we'll see you back for lecture 4B. Have a good afternoon.